Welcome to Writer, a show about and for writers. I'm your host, Susan Shaw, and with me, a writer, Kevin Robinson, is with us, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Susan.
Now, you are a writer, you are an author, you are a speaker, and you came into the writing business kind of in an interesting way. Tell us about how you became a writer, Kevin.
Probably the last thing on my mind. I never considered it growing up. I went from job to job, trying everything. I had a teaching degree. Didn't particularly enjoy that. Got into an alternative school, a boys' ranch in Central Florida, teaching kids who were at risk, kids, abused kids from troubled homes, first offenders in the courts, and broke my neck on a dock railing broke away there at the ranch one day. And all of a sudden I'm taking inventory, you know, what will I do now? I'm paralyzed, I can't use my hands, or barely can use my hands, I can't walk. And at the hospital rehabilitation, occupational therapy gym, they pushed me up to a wheelchair, they strapped a pencil in my hand and said, here, relearn to type. And I'd been a 65 words a minute typist before, and here I am pecking away one key at a time. But just for the fun of it, I started a novel and thought maybe something will come of it. So a few years later, I just started reading everything I could get my hands on about how to be a freelance writer. I started going to writers' conferences, taking classes at the local colleges and universities, and discovered I loved it. Just
and
absolutely
here you
loved
are.
it.
And now you have 3 mystery books published. You've written hundreds of articles for magazines and newspapers, and you just keep going and going. And you even have a fantasy trilogy that's in the works, right? I
actually had completed 2/3 of the fantasy trilogy. While I was learning to freelance, I was doing articles and essays and photography and having fun learning about the magazine market, but I was working on a fantasy on the side and actually completed 2 of the novel-length manuscripts when this idea for a mystery just came out of nowhere and blindsided me. And I did about 12 chapters, and I realized this is not going to be a short story. There's something here, and it's fun, and I'm enjoying it. And my protagonist, Stick Foster, the paraplegic newspaper reporter, just sort of came alive in the story. The next thing I know, I had a phone call from New York. You know, we'd like to buy your novel. Would you consider doing a series based on this character? And so it was a total surprise to me, but a delightful surprise. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
What's that like, getting a call like that?
It's incredible, and I think my first reaction when I hung up was, who was that, and who's pulling my chain? It had to be a joke. It couldn't have been real. And of course, a couple of weeks later, when the contract actually came, I realized that it was real. But very exciting and kind of surreal. I mean, to come out of left field and have no real expectations and realize how bad the odds were. I found out later that that particular publishing house receives 2,000 unsolicited manuscripts every month. Of those, the mystery editor usually gets to look at about 200. And of those 200, the mystery editor is allowed to pursue 2 in any given month. Now, had I known ahead of time exactly how bad those odds were, I probably would have tried somewhere else or, you know, snuck into it some other way. But I'm glad I did, and I think everybody's got to do that. You've got to jump in regardless of the odds and give it a try. You don't know till you try.
That's right. And talk about odds, too. I mean, what do you think about your books when they were sitting there and they gave you a call, and they can only call 2 people out of those thousands? What made them call you? What stuck out?
I think that what helped me the most was that I had a mentor early in my career. I met a Chicago novelist and short story writer named Harry Mark Petrakis. His probably most famous novel was Dream of Kings, and it was a movie in '69 with Anthony Quinn and Irene Pappas. And he wrote a sequel to it called Ghost of the Sun in 1990. And he picked up a manuscript that I submitted. In fact, it was a chapter of the fantasy to the writers' conference. And after his keynote address, he told everybody that he hadn't been able to get to the manuscripts that had been submitted to him. He'd been at another writers' conference. And then afterwards, everybody sort of moaned. And afterwards, I heard him asking at the registration desk, do you know who Kevin Robinson is? And he came and he handed me back this 30-page chapter, edited from beginning to end with a full-page note at the end. And he said, if you're willing to learn to edit and to cut and to work on your pacing, I will work with you. Wow. Well, that began a relationship for the next 2 years. I just fired stuff back to him, and I learned to hone. And I think Split Seconds sold, not because I was a great novelist the first time out of the chute, but because the pacing was good. I grabbed the reader, and I honed it down to where it was action, 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 and it just kept moving. And I think that's why I got a chance, maybe where other writers who might have better style and technique in other areas maybe don't get the chance.
How important is it to have a mentor? Should that be something people look at?
I think so. I think there's two things involved. One, you have to be willing to be edited. You can't go into it believing that you're God's gift to the literary world, because that's unrealistic. I mean, every once in a while, someone explodes out of nowhere, and they seem to have this magical gift. But for the most part, I think we have to learn it. And so if you have that attitude that if someone cuts my work apart and my manuscript comes back with page after page of red or blue marks all over it, I'm going to take that seriously, and I'm going to follow up and see what I can do about improving it. If you're willing to do that, then a mentor is priceless, because here's someone with the experience who's been through it themselves, and when they tell you, you know, you need to cut these 3 paragraphs, well, you can't react. You've got to say, no, why would they say that? And then you take them out. You can always put them back in if you disagree, but take them out and rewrite it with them gone and see. And every time he suggested, not only did I take his suggestions, but I would keep going and try to cut and recut, because I realized that this flowing prose that I thought was so wonderful was slowing down the story. So I think those are the 2 keys. Be willing to be edited and to redo, and then when you find someone, latch on for dear life and listen and try everything they tell you, because it's invaluable.
But see, Kevin, you were lucky enough to have somebody single you out. And for all these writer wannabes that are watching, they're going to say, well, how do I find somebody like that? So if you had to really find a mentor yourself, how would you go about that?
There's 2 excellent places. I think the people who've helped me most are people that I've met at classes that I've taken. I took a workshop with James Gunn and Frederick Paul, famous science fiction writers, at the University of Kansas. Both of those men, invaluable advice. So your local community college, your local university will have classes that anyone can take, even without, you know, community access type things. And some of these people are excellent. The other way is to go to writers' festivals and conferences when they're in town, and see who the panelists are and the writers are, and submit your work to be critiqued. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it costs an extra $20 or $30, but it's well worth it. Now, it's a waste of your money if you don't want to hear what they have to say. I mean, don't even bother. If your manuscript came out and you're convinced it's divinely inspired, don't waste your money on critique, because you're just going to get upset. But if you're willing to really hear what people have to say, that's a great place to find a mentor. Because all of us who are published run into people all the time trying to thrust manuscripts into our hands. And we like to help people who really want to learn, because we've been helped, but most of them don't. And it's very sad when you spend your time and they've spent their time, but then they don't want to do anything more. They just want it to be printed and published, and they want to get rich, and that's the end of it. And that's sad when that happens.
Yeah, because everybody gets rich once they get published, right?
Right. Don't I wish, don't I wish.
How long is that a process going to take? How long is it going to take to become well-known?
I don't know. I started out with a very small publisher. Print runs 3,000 to 4,000 copies. So for me, it's a very slow process. The model that I sort of look up to with hope is writer Nancy Pickard, a wonderful mystery writer. She writes the Jenny Kane mysteries. And I fell in love with her work a long, long time ago. Her first couple of novels, The Generous Death, I think maybe was her first. Just fun, entertaining. But then as I followed her series through the years, she's up to maybe the 8th or 9th now, But I Wouldn't Want to Die There, I think, is her latest title. And she has improved so as a writer. I mean, the strength of her prose and the magic of her mysteries, and her character has developed in so many ways. And she's moved up from very small advances and very low readership to the point now where, you know, her publisher sends her on tours, and her contracts are very sizable, and she's earned it. And so I look at that, and I think the trick is, can I do the next one better than I did the last one? Can I learn something from this one that I can put into the next one? And I think that's the trick. And I think anybody who goes into it thinking I'm going to write the great American novel and get rich is just kidding themselves. That happens so infrequently. But if you look at the long term and say, well, it may take me 7 or 8 or 9 books to build a readership and to learn my craft, then I think there's a much, much better possibility.
Are you ever afraid when you sit before the typewriter?
For my first 2 books, I actually wasn't. It was so much fun. It was a total exercise in letting the right brain, that creative half, just run. It was almost like reading a novel instead of writing one for me, because I was learning what was going on as it was happening. It would flow out on the computer screen, and sometimes I'd go back and read it the next day and wonder where it came from. So there was no fear. Ignorance is bliss, just running on. The third book had a lot more research, and I think I tried real hard to make the puzzle good. And that's when I started to get nervous, and I started to think, because I was slowing down to develop it a little more. And then you start to get nervous, and you go, oh, this isn't going to work, and oh, this is going to be obvious, and the reader will see this right away. And so you fret more, I think, when you slow down. But I think, again, that's part of learning the craft. I think that comes with the territory.
Now, you have a disability. You write about people with disabilities in some of your books. Your hero, Stick Foster. Do you think it has helped you get published or not?
I think it did, and I was afraid to do it at first because I was afraid it would be hokey or it would seem politically correct. But when I started the Stick Foster series, it just seemed very natural to me, and I just made him a character like many of my disabled friends, people I knew, and characteristics that they had. And I think that helped make him real for the reader. But it's a narrow line. It's a very narrow line to try to walk between what will be hokey and seem like a gimmick and what will seem like a real character that people can identify with.
And the thing I really like about that character Stick is I read the book, A Matter of Perspective, is he defies all the stereotypes. Now, how did you go about doing that where I can read a book and you have to tell me in the words that he's in a wheelchair because I forgot?
That was very fortunate. I think I lucked into that. What tipped me off to that was a reviewer in South Florida, a newspaper reporter who did a review of the book and did an interview with me, and her comment was, the first thing you notice about Kevin Robinson is his wheelchair. The second thing you notice is that he's a great storyteller. The third thing you notice is that you don't notice the wheelchair anymore. And when I read that, of course, I was very flattered, but I realized that's what I had to do with Stick. That's the trick to making Stick Foster work in a book. If you can get the reader to forget periodically that he's in a chair, you've created a real character. Then, when something happens and the chair has a part to play, then the impact is greater. And so that's just one of those serendipitous things that turned on a light bulb for me and said, this is something I need to work on. This is a way to make this function better.
And it really does function better. I mean, it really works. This guy has a beautiful wife who all these men want, and she's also in a wheelchair. And I mean, how many times do we think, you know, a woman in a wheelchair is wanted by men? But I mean, you bring her so alive.
One of the greatest things that happened to me is when I was first injured and was recovering in a hospital near Orlando, a fellow who played for the Orlando Orange Wheels wheelchair basketball team at the time started visiting me. Every other day he gave up his lunch hour to come sit by my bedside and to tell me about wheelchair sports and about hand controls for cars and all the things I'd be able to do. Instead of laying in the hospital focusing on all the things that I thought I wouldn't be able to do, here's someone who's telling me about things that are ahead of me. The first thing I did when I got out of the hospital was start to hang out with the Orlando Orange Wheels. And I was, you know, way out of shape, and I didn't know how to use the chair, but I'd try to do their drills with them. And as a result, I was around very active people in chairs with great attitudes about themselves and their abilities. So I saw that kind of an example. The second benefit, that my daughter learned to walk, pulling herself up on those guys' chairs. I mean, she'd be playing around with a guy who'd be taking his fake leg off and throwing it aside for practice. And so she doesn't even see disability at all. And I think it's all a matter of attitude and what you're exposed to. And most people don't have an opportunity to be exposed to people like that in chairs. And so, hopefully when they read my book, they go, oh, well, these aren't people in the hospispittal dying or aged people.
Destroyed.
Right, right. And the chair is such a negative stereotype generally that you have to work kind of hard to overcome that and get people to realize, no, it's just a piece of metal with wheels on it. It's not that big a deal.
And you had a lot of other jobs. I mean, I found it so interesting to see all the jobs that you have had, that if somebody really wants to be a writer, they can go from any career choice to become a writer.
Well, the fodder from that kind of a background is wonderful in fiction. When I write about, in split seconds, about crabbing on the Intercoastal Waterway, I was there, I did it. So I know what that's like. If I write about truck driving or working in a warehouse or teaching school or working on a dairy farm, those are all things that I've done. And I never realized how valuable that experience would be until I started writing fiction. And then all of a sudden it's a gold mine. You have this wealth behind you that you can draw on.
Mm-hmm. Do writers need to have a lot of wealth to draw on? Do they need to just go out and experience everything in life?
I think there's two kinds of writers. I think there are those who can, just out of their imaginations, come up with magic. I don't know exactly how they do that. But I need to have seen it. I need to have some sense of it before I could do it. In fact, one of the most traumatic things in writing A Matter of Perspective, I needed to write a scene that was a pretrial settlement hearing. Now, I interviewed dozens of lawyers. I mean, I knew what happened, but I've never seen that. I've never been there. And it was very frightening for me to write that scene. And of course, afterwards, I'm throwing it at every lawyer I know, saying, is this even close? And I lucked out. It turned out to be right on. And every lawyer that I showed it to said, yes, that's it. But that's difficult. If you've experienced it, if you've actually seen it, felt it, touched it, it's much easier for me anyway.
So what advice do you have to people who want to learn to write? I mean, they want to write the great American novel, they want to write newspapers and they want to be Kevin Robinson. I mean, what do they do? How do they start this?
I think that you often hear people say there's two kinds of aspiring writers. There's those who want to be writers, and there's those who want to write. And the ones who want to be writers, maybe it's they want to have written, but unless they actually sit down and write, it's sort of pointless. But the ones who want to write will know that. And if a person wants to write, you can't keep them away from the typewriter, or away from a notepad, or away from the word processor. The ideas are just going to be pouring out, and they're going to be very anxious to get them down. And if you feel like that, then get whatever training you can, read up. If you want to do freelancing work, there's great books out there. If you want to write fiction, there are wonderful books. Lawrence Block has a wonderful book called Telling Lies for Fun and Profit. John Gardner has a great book on becoming a novelist. Those are books I read early on, and there's just magical clues and keys in there. And so the public library is a great source for getting started.
Have you been rejected a lot, Kevin?
A lot. A good year for me is 80% rejection.
Wow.
And I think you have to know, I mean, that's a year when I make more than I spend pulling it all off. And I think people have to know going in that they're up against a Red Book. They get over 40,000 unsolicited short story submissions every year.
Wow.
Well, what do they publish?
Yeah.
24 or 40 every year? And most of the ones they publish are from writers they know, or from agented writers that they've worked with the agent before. So to get out of that slush pile, the odds are horrible. But if you don't get in the slush pile, you don't have a chance. So you've got to have a tough skin. You've got to be willing to throw it out there, and if it comes back fine, spruce it up and send it out again. I mean, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of markets. So can you take the rejection? And if you can, then you hang in there, and eventually, every time you sell something, you know, then you have a little bit of a resume, and that helps the next time. So,
now, if we asked your wife how you take rejection, would she say the same things that you just did? I mean, how does it affect the family?
For the most part, I don't think anybody knows.
They don't know?
No, I just don't think anybody would know. I don't think anybody could tell you, except maybe with the novel. When I started sending the novel out, I sent it out 4 times before it was accepted. And I think the first 3 times were traumatic, not because they were rejections, but because they were almosts. I mean, I got long letters back saying, this is very publishable, this is great writing, this is, you know, but it's not, doesn't fit any of our categories. We don't have a, it's not exactly like our mysteries, it's not exactly like our thrillers. And so to be that close, I think it would have been easier for me if it was just, oh, this stinks, we don't want it. But to be that close and not make it, then you're thinking, well, boy, what do I change? What do I do? What can I hone here before I send it in the next time?
Are you hoping to get, like, maybe somebody someday to make movies about your books?
I just about had a heart attack when my Hollywood agent called last year and said that Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg and Disney, along with 3 other studios, had all asked to see Mallrats, my second novel.
Wow.
And that was just, what a thrill. Now, again, the odds are horrendous, and they may read it and think about it and make notes on it, and nothing may happen for years, and so, you know, you certainly can't count on that. And they warned me, you know, this means nothing. This means, well, it means a lot to a writer because you realize you're in the game, you're in the slush pile, you've got a chance. And I think that inspires me. That's very exciting, just to know, to be in that situation where you know that's a possibility. I'm sure it's a long shot, but life is a long shot.
But who in your fantasies would play your characters?
I don't know. You know, people have asked me that.
Think about this, Kevin.
I know, and I have. I actually have. And I just can't. Stick is so unique to me, I can't really think in terms of an actor or, doing that. And I'm sure there's lots of great actors who could do a very good job at it. There's probably lots of great disabled actors who could do a good job at it. But I don't know. I guess he's such a real character to me. It's hard for me to suddenly put another face on him.
How long do you spend writing every day? Do you write every day?
I do, and it depends on what I have to do and what kind of deadlines I have to do. I generally like to do letters and catch-up work in the morning. I do freelance nonfiction late morning into early afternoon, and fiction is usually an afternoon thing for me. That's the treat. That's sort of the dessert. You know, when I get the business work out of the way, afternoon is when I write. If I'm doing well and I'm getting the time I want for the fiction, I do 4 to 6 pages a day, probably. And Lawrence Block said one time, if you do a page a day, you can write a novel every year. I mean, at the end of the year, you've got 365 pages. That's a great novel as far as size is concerned. So taking it a little bit at a time, seeing the big picture, you know, not how do I write 300 and some odd pages, that's sort of daunting. But if I can do a few pages a day, it adds up pretty quickly.
Do you have any little writing rituals? Are there certain things you must do before you start writing?
Not really, but sometimes it's hard to change gears. If I've been working on an article assignment or I've been working on something else, nonfiction, sometimes it's hard to change gears and sort of get the right brain functioning. I like to put the headphones on, get the Moody Blues playing, or K.T. Oslin, or K.D. Lang, or there's just some great Eagles. I like old Eagles. That's sort of good. To sort of just
right by.
Well, exactly, and it shuts out what's happening in the house, and you don't hear the street traffic on the street, and suddenly you're just sort of self-contained. And I think music is a great tool for me. Helps me.
And you have 3 pets. You have 3 cats, right?
I do have 3 cats. You know a lot about me.
Yes, it's true. I did a little background work on you, Kevin.
You did.
Yeah, not like your stick Foster, though. He could beat me any day of the week on background stuff. But do you ever tell your pets or work out stories with the pets?
The character, Stick's cat, Butkus, is based on my wife's cat, TC. And I sort of just picked him right up out of our lives and stuck him in the book. And that's been kind of fun. But, cats in mysteries are sort of in vogue now. And I didn't realize that when I wrote Split Seconds and put Butkus in. I had no idea. I hadn't read any of the Cat Who mysteries, and I had no idea that there's an entire research out there about which books have cats in them and which don't. I mean, there's literally nonfiction books that tell, you know, when you read your mysteries, here's the ones that do and don't. But it was fun to find out that I had done something right or something that was quite in.
When you find out all these things now that, like you are, things that are in, things that are out, things to put in, are you amazed that you've done so well?
That I blundered? You can say it, that I blundered.
You just exactly. Fell into this, Kevin?
Exactly. and I think that's part of what it is. And the other thing about that is when I began to meet other mystery writers, I realized this is a wonderful community. These people, Lawrence Block and Mary Higgins Clark and Elizabeth Peters, people that you would think are so far up there that, you know, they wouldn't even have the time to talk to you. These are wonderful folks. And so I've had an opportunity to sort of quiz Nancy Picard and Randy Russell and Jill Churchill and ask them questions. You know, what do I do about an agent? What do I do about this particular contract issue? How do I handle this in my plot? And oh, what a wealth of information. That's been a lot of fun. So things that I stumbled into with Split Seconds, my first book, now I have people I can call on the phone and say, you got any suggestions how I should handle this? And oh, the advice, to have that kind of advice is wonderful.
What's the big picture for you? Where are you going to be in like 10, 20 years? People ask you that a lot, probably.
I don't know. I'd like to still be writing about Stick Foster. I hope there's a market out there. If I can get with a publisher that puts enough copies out that it gets to the general readership, I think there's a place for Stick, and I'd like to be doing that. At the same time, I've just started a new project. My second book in the Stick Foster series, Mallrats, crossed over to YA, to young adult. It was reviewed in the school library journal. It was just in the exhibition in New York City Public Library's 65th annual exhibition for books for the teenage. So all of a sudden it's creating a stir, and 3 editors are waiting for a proposal for a young adult series. I'd like to do that. I'm excited about that. And the tentative title of the first book in that series is Orlando Magic. And so I've got meetings scheduled with folks at Orlando Magic. I've been talking to Shaquille O'Neal's agent, And so this is a project I'm really excited about, and whether or not I get all the permission necessary to do what I want to do with it remains to be seen. But I think the Mall Rat Mysteries will be a project that will be a lot of fun for me in the years ahead.
And we'll be looking for it just about a time, but you've got to ask every writer, who do you like to read? Who do you sit down and read?
Dick Francis, I think, is one of my all-time favorites. I love his protagonists. I love the way he writes. And if there's anybody that I try to emulate, I think it would be Dick Francis.
So is that good? Follow somebody?
I think so.
Find somebody you
I think
like?
so. If it feels right in your heart. I mean, if you find yourself really liking the protagonist, you know, if you'd like to live next door to the guy, if you'd like to be in business with the guy, if you feel like he's somebody you'd be interested in meeting for a drink or whatever, if the protagonist, he or she, is a person, an individual that you really touch with, then start to think about that. And I think that's the direction you should go. If you try to write about a character that you're not in sync with and you don't feel comfortable with, I don't think it'll work.
Got to find your own way. And thanks for joining us on Writer to Writer. Kevin Robinson with us. And we thank you for joining us. The show's produced at Florida Community College at Jacksonville, and we're so glad that you were a part of it.